Hello, my name is Herm McGee, and today I will be going through all the videos that was sent and giving my audience impact delivery craft and what I think about all of them. And then I'll give it a summary, a cumulative summary. Right? So I started off with Keenan's speech. I said the audience was a professional setting since the activity was at Harvard. I said that this would have to be maybe a more um professional verbiage, but also I'm assuming there's a lot of white people there, more than black since it's Harvard. So you probably have to be a little less black colloquial, but more white colloquial, right? But there will be some of his cohort, so we could speak more informally at times. Uh, I was struggling on the impact, but I think the impact of Keelan's speech was that this brings awareness to the fears or anxiety that a person would get when starting something new. So I guess don't be afraid to do something new. But he takes a deep stance when in his story. And when he's doing that, it demonstrates his depth of knowledge on the topic. His delivery, his cadence. I guess the most significant thing would be his cadence. It fluctuated constantly. It's kind of like Sanai's speech, or I think it was Sanai. But she started out happy and then moved on to something serious. But like just with him, he started with him being a child and then went into something more deeper and I guess more impactful. And then he moved with indicative transitions, yeah. And he also, I guess this would be an example of this, but he jumped up and down when he wanted to jump up and down. He moved left to right with his hands and with his feet, and I guess it was all intentional. And yeah, it really added to his innotation at time, innotation and cadence. Uh, I think most people I think use the storytelling speaking style, but he also used this to emphasize his means of persuasion, where he introduced a topic and then told them about it more as the story progressed, or told them about really his story as it progressed, and then introduced the what. So he started with the why and then moved all the way down to the what, like we were talking about in class. And I guess the biggest thing that I liked about his speech was that the authenticity of it, like you could really tell that that was him completely and not somebody just reading a script or anything. Some of the rhetorical devices that he used were alliteration, parallelism, and analogies, really to add a layer of depth to his, I guess, his overall story. I really liked his speech and his story. It's motivational. Jonah, I watched his video second. His audience was anyone. Well, since I couldn't really, you weren't directly looking at an audience. I just based it off of what the information in the video was. So I said his audience was anyone that was involved in the topic of bullying, right? He referenced the LGBTQ community and how they face bullying and oppression, and nobody wants to be around them. So his speech is targeted more those people. The impact is he brings awareness to the people being oppressed and related to how imagination is such an important factor in helping themselves. But he also wants to allow oppressors to recognize how wrong they are, right? So it's really just the impact is bringing awareness to everyone that's facing this problem, try to help them. The delivery, really, all these videos had wonderful delivery, but he starts immediately after going with the third year, and then slows the pace back down and picks it up. But it's with every word. It's like he would slow down with one word, and then with the other word, he would just be all the way back up here. That was nice. He also kind of did that with his e-notation. So really, those two are really synchronized and mixed pretty well in his speech. He has some scholarly sources to back up his point of imagination. He used Benjamin Franklin and some others. And some of the biggest rhetorical devices that he used were pathos, ethos, logos, along with metaphors, analogies, parallelism. Right? Um, Zayla, I think hers was a bit harder to decipher, but I think her audience was the people going through troubling times, just like her. I know she said her I think it was her father or her grandfather had committed suicide and left her with 3 words, but maybe it was like to never give up. The impacts. Well, then she moved on to wisdom, so I'm assuming her word was wisdom, but wisdom cannot be defined or found from one aspect, but she talked about 3 different aspects, and when those all come together, then you actually have a conception of wisdom, right? Her delivery, her facial expressions and bodily movements, they went wonderfully, like splendid with her annotation. Like it was beautiful. But she moved with indicative transitions also, and she had a purpose for each of her movements. It wasn't just she was like just moving to be moving, and then her facial expressions also. Like she was looking this way and talking, and then when it got a bit more serious, she looked back, and it was wonderful. Her craft, she did something that the others didn't do. Kind of, it was like she didn't start with her story. Instead, she started with like an analogy. Or sorry, no, sorry, that was somebody else. She had a more teaching style because she talked about how you can get wisdom, what wisdom is, and then included that into her use of storytelling. She also had bigger pauses, so her cadence was a bit differently than everybody else's. Like she went from, I don't know if there's a point 0.5 gear, but I want to say 0.5 to 4, right? And it was really just the pauses in between that made it seem like 0.5. She also had several scholarly sources to make her claim more credible. That demonstrates her use of pathos and ethos and logos. But her story itself demonstrated pathos, just because she was talking about suicide and I think it was her grandfather, and she actually like used that for wisdom. And lastly, her one liners, they were beautiful also. I don't have an example, but I know how I felt. Sinai. Her audience was to women of color, or women, but women of color more specifically. She referenced inequality and segregation because of her color, so she was speaking to the people that this was happening to. So I associated the audience with the target audience is what I really was associating it with. The impact was that people of her color were being discriminated against for no reason except for the color of their skin, pretty much. And she has often been told to be quiet and calm down, but it's really showing, I guess it'd be accepting it by not saying anything. And she was saying how wrong it actually was. I guess openly disagreeing with it. Her cadence and intonation from delivery, they were a bit different than really everybody else's because she started, I guess like Kenan's, but she started it was kind of where she started happy and laughing and talking about peace in a fun type of way, and then immediately, or like 2 seconds after, she switched to seriousness and kept it there. So I think that's like a different cadence and intonation, or if anything it's just a different intonation or intonation. uh mm, she also, I guess with the delivery, emphasized she used movements that complemented her move. She used movements that complemented her words rather. Uh, she used she used quotes, and she really used different rhetorical devices like parallelism and alliteration. She used them wonderfully actually. She used a bit of humor, and her word choice was wonderful also. Her cadence, I guess her cadence also goes along with the delivery, but it was nice too. And this, I guess, when it all came together, it made the story better. Next, I moved on to Jamab, Mr. Bryant. Uh, First, I find it amazing that he was able to fit everything in those 90 seconds. He had a story, a joke, a moral, and was persuasive while doing it all. It was nice. He also had an analogy about value, and then he chose an example that was, I guess, he increased proximity of it, right? With his delivery, his cadence was consistent, but his annotation fluctuated constantly. He appealed to the pathos, logos, and ethos. Um, and I guess he knew who he was dealing with, but it didn't seem like anything different than what a normal conversation would consist of. I guess maybe it was a pastor. That's what it gave. It was, so I'd say his audience. Well, even though they were on a talk show, the since it's called The Preachers, he was kind of in like a preaching format. Um, I don't think his audience had anything to do with really color that much, but that, yeah. Ravi, his audience, he was on a talk show also, surrounded by thousands of people. Audience didn't have anything to do with it, but the religions did, and didn't want to offend anyone, so he had to choose his words carefully, right? So the impact, he answered the questions in a way that his responses, well, he answered the question in the way that he wanted to, right? And which gave him more freedom to reach for a different answer. Uh, Also, what he did was he kind of like questioned the question, and then questioned the person that asked the question. That also gave him a little more room to operate, while not, like, I guess it was indirectly answering the question again, but I guess that was really the highlight of it. His annotation was constant, but he put emphasis on certain words. And then I guess let's go with that. Oh yes, his I guess the delivery also, his cadence, and then his annotation. He had great eye contact and was very persuasive. His movements, I guess, emphasized what he was talking about. Certain rhetorical devices that he used were like parallelism, metaphors, analogies, and paradoxes. He actually used quite a bit of them to discredit the question, I guess. And then the last video that I watched was the conference at Harvard, right? I started with Osazi. Uh, I guess I like the way that he used his cadence, right? So we started at the lowest cadence, but he gradually moved up. And then what he was doing while he was talking is like they all were doing this, but he did it more. He defined like every word that he said to make sure that there was no misconceptions in what he was saying. He also used rhetorical questions to appeal to the audience's emotion. He did it like immediately when he started. I think Maya did also. Yes. Um and he didn't stick to the same annotation even though the cadence was somewhat similar. His teaching style, it was different also. He used storyteller and a teacher. I just said teacher because he was like defining all those words, and then storyteller because he was kind of defining what he was talking about, his story and his experiences. And he also had a little humor in his story. It was kind of funny too. Mullis, I didn't get too much from Mullis, but I know he started off with a story about himself, and then he really dove into it, and then results it had on him. Peyton, she started with the story, but you can really see her feelings reflect in her hand movements and facial expressions. Really, her facial expressions. And she also used a little humor. They all really did. They all really lightened up the mood, and that was nice. And her annotation changed constantly. Maya, like I said earlier, she engaged the audience through rhetorical questions. Then she mixed in a bit of humor, which is kind of funny, and seriousness. And her analogies were pretty good also. And Jordan, instead of a story, he used an analogy. He defined it more just to make sure that people knew what he was talking about. But in a different setting, I feel like that would be very like a good increased proximity example. And then he used statistics and facts to help it. And then he used ethos, pathos, and logos and wrapped everything up. And like I said, how so circular reasoning. Thank you for your time. I will see you on Saturday.